It's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to How the Muslims Conquered Spain, Guadelete 711 medieval documentary by Kings and Generals. Now, if you haven't seen my reaction to the other videos in this series about the early Muslim expansion, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. And, of course, the usual disclaimer when I react to anything historical: if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, it is probably obvious I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments below. With that being said, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to Kings and Generals, another great history channel here on YouTube. And so it looks like we're getting into more familiar territory now. But I never knew how the Muslims conquered Spain, which is Moors or Berbers. Someone said they're the same, but they were mostly known as the Moors. So let's best not ramble on for too much longer. Let's get this up on screen, and captions on for this, and let's get into this.
In our previous video, we covered the eastern frontier of the Umayyad Caliphate during a period of...
Sorry, that caught me off guard that these are... Oh, you can move them around. Oh. Sorry, that's just... It must be something they just recently added, so...
unprecedented expansion under the recently ascended Caliph al-Walid, as protracted conflicts in Transoxiana and Sind pushed the borders of the Caliphate ever further, greatly increasing the power of Governor al-Hajjaj, who, as the overseer of all the Caliph's eastern provinces, had grown more influential than most kings. Moreover, it was not only in Asia that the Umayyads, so recently on the brink of civil war, were seeing renewed successes. At the same time Muhammad ibn Qasim's army was sweeping through Sind, another new frontier was being invaded thousands of miles to the west, the land of Iberia, under the control of the Germanic Visigoths. Across such a vast area, the Caliphate was being exposed to many different cultures. But you don't have to invade Iberia to find out what the Germanic Visigoths are talking about these days. You can view the internet through their eyes using our sponsor, NordVPN.
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
NordVPN.com/kings.
Feel free to check them out if you're interested.
The Visigothic kingdom of Iberia could trace its roots back to Alaric, the famous general who first fought for Emperor Theodosius against the Franks, holding the Balkans as a Roman foederati or semi-autonomous ally, before his relationship with the empire soured, and he became the first person to sack the Eternal City in over 700 years. The Visigoths had been one of the several so-called barbarian peoples to arrive in the territory of the crumbling Roman Empire, with various Gothic and other Germanic peoples found in great numbers throughout the empire and on its outskirts as slaves, soldiers, and allies. In the aftermath of Western Rome's fall, the Visigoths were among the first to carve out their own kingdom from its ashes. Though Alaric's power base had been in the Balkans, the Visigoths would migrate ever westward following his death, at times allies of convenience to the collapsing Roman Empire, and at other times taking advantage of the West's fall to expand their power. It would be in the Aquitaine region of western France that the Visigoths would first establish a true kingdom, from there pushing into Suebi-controlled Hispania at Rome's behest, their kingdom encompassing Aquitaine and nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula by the death of the great warrior and lawmaker King Euric in 484. The years that followed would be less kind, however, as easy expansion against the backdrop of a crumbling Rome gave way to new rivalries against other powerful barbarian kingdoms, most notably the...
Bear in mind, I know little... I mean, I may not know much about the Visigoths, but I know about the Ostrogoths because when I used to... years ago, when not only learning a little bit of history, but also playing Age of Empires 2... One of the campaigns was of Attila the Hun, and one of his main allies against the Romans was the Ostrogoths. Just a little tidbit to throw in there.
Franks and Burgundians. It would not be long after Ulric's death, during the reign of his successor, Alaric II, that the Visigothic territories in France would fall to these northern rivals, led by the Merovingian king Clovis, leading to the establishment of Toledo as the new Visigothic capital. With the Pyrenees now forming a natural border, the Visigothic kingdom would remain secure in Hispania for the next 2 centuries, with occasional further conflicts with the Franks.
Well, when you got borders that are got when you got a mountainous border with plenty of mountains, it becomes a lot easier to defend. I'm not an expert, but you don't have to be an expert to know that much.
And a revanchist Eastern Roman Empire, making little lasting change to the status quo. As the 8th century dawned, though, the Visigoths would unexpectedly find a far greater danger arising to their south. The Umayyad Caliphate's border with the Visigothic kingdom had been an embattled one since their first arrival, with raids into southern Iberia having begun as early as 706, following the conquest of Tangier in today's Morocco. In fact, the campaign that would spell the end of the Visigothic kingdom likely began as another of these large-scale raids, with the force of some 1,700 that crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 710 under the leadership of Tariq ibn Ziyad, governor of Tangier, being quite sizable for a skirmishing party, but smaller than would be expected had they intended a campaign of conquest from the beginning. But circumstances favoured the Muslims. Following the recent death of King Witiza, the Visigothic kingdom had entered into a succession crisis, with Roderick in control of southern Iberia, pitted against the poorly documented Angela II in the north. However, this low-intensity civil war was only indicative of larger weaknesses within the Visigothic kingdom. While the Visigoths had ruled Iberia independently for more than 2...
Even after the kingdom was formed, the Visigoths still relying on the tribal system, which made the administration in the kingdom inefficient. Yeah. That tribal system is not exactly great when you've got large territory. And it's proven that the tribal system, when doesn't really work when you've taken over a whole country. But that's just on my limited knowledge of it, so don't feel free not to pay too much attention to that if you don't want to.
Centuries at this point, and had exercised great autonomy under a weakened Rome for another century before their independence. They had continued to rule on essentially tribal lines, despite the scale of their kingdom rendering them inefficient. The feudal systems that would allow later kingdoms to
The kingdom had never adopted the feudal system, making it impossible to build the necessary manpower. Yeah, because the problem is with the tribal system, when you try to unite, it can literally almost fall apart almost immediately due to personal rivalries between tribes. It's been shown all over the world that tribal systems, when trying to have an administration over an entire country, doesn't work.
Efficiently raise armies through local vassals did not yet exist in Iberia, and while the landed aristocratic class of the Roman period had essentially merged with the Visigothic conquerors to form a unified ruling class, the ethnic Visigoths that still made up most of the readily available warriors the various Visigothic chiefs could draw on made up only a very small minority in the larger kingdom. King Recared's abandonment of the Arian sect of Christianity.
In the late 7th century, the Visigothic king Recard abandoned Arianism and favoured the Chalcedonian, I don't know if I said that right, sect, which caused a religious tension in the kingdom. Oh yeah, and that makes it worse, religious tension.
Traditionally followed by the Visigoths in 589 in favour of their kingdom's majority Chalcedonian Christian faith, accompanied by the abandonment of the Gothic tongue as a church language, had done much to unify the Visigoths with their subjects. However, the Hispano-Roman aristocrats had not been a warrior nobility.
With an obsolete administration and a few warrior chieftains in the kingdom, the Visigothic king had to rely on the reluctant peasants to go to war.
And the kingdom lacked efficient administrative systems by which to mobilize its peasantry to war. While every denizen of the Visigothic kingdom was theoretically required to provide military service to the king on demand, this duty was owed directly to the king, rather than to a more accessible local intermediary, making it a duty only too easy to ignore for the vast majority of the population outside Toledo and the king's own domain. Thus, while the caliphate had been able...
Hang on. Unlike their counterparts, not only the Muslims followed the laws based on the Quran, but they also adopted the administrative systems from the Romans and the Sassanids, which made their military much more effective than the Goths.
Able to vastly expand its power through its conquests, through recruiting large numbers of converts in conquered territories for further campaigns, and by embracing the sophisticated administrative systems left behind by the Romans and Persians, coupled with laws laid down in the Quran. The military power of the Visigothic kingdom was not fundamentally changed from the tribal armies that had fought Rome under Alaric. Its army still made up in large part by the personal warriors of Visigothic chiefs, despite the vastly larger Latin population they ruled over. In addition to the relative unpreparedness of their foes, the Arabs had a valuable ally on their side, Count Julian of Ceuta, who was most likely a Byzantine governor who had switched his allegiance upon his empire's abandonment of North Africa, rather than attempting to fight a doomed resistance against the Arabs. While it seems he aided by providing his suzerain ships for the crossing of the Strait of Gibraltar, his larger role in the story is somewhat in question, despite his importance in later accounts, which claim he had made the first attack on Iberia with his own forces in 709.
In later sources believe that Julian wanted to avenge his daughter by cooperating with the Muslims,
seizing loot with which to entice the Arabs to destroy Roderick for him and avenge his daughter's rape at the Visigothic king's hands. No mention of this grudge exists.
Strong motivation then.
In the Mozarabic Chronicle of 754, the earliest surviving account of the invasion. And neither Julian's subservience to the more powerful Arabs, nor Musa's predictable decision to expand into the rich lands of the Visigoths require any tales of vengeance to explain. The accounts that paint Julian as the architect of the Visigoth...
However, in Mozarabic Chronicle of 754, it is claimed that the Muslims had already begun raiding a few years prior.
Kingdom's conquest also clash with both the Mozarabic Chronicle's assertion that Arab raiding had begun years before the conquest, and with the common narrative...
I'm sorry if I butcher any pronunciations in this.
...of later Christian accounts, which claim that it was the enemies of Roderick within Iberia that requested and facilitated the Muslim invasion. While any of these stories might be at least partially true, they are likely irrelevant. With North Africa subjugated and inhospitable, with difficult-to-traverse desert to the south, the Caliphate's invasion of Hispania was an inevitability, whether Roderick was guilty of raping Julian's daughter or not, and Julian would have been compelled to support Musa as a caliphal vassal, with or without any personal grudge. Anecdotally, as a side note, the modern name of the Strait of Gibraltar is named for Tariq, in a corruption of the Arabic Jabal Tariq or Tariq's mountain.
Okay.
The renewal of raiding in the south went at first unanswered by the Visigoths, allowing Tariq to establish a secure base of operations on the site that would later become the town of Algeciras, from there pushing deeper into Iberia. They would face their first opponent shortly after, Theodemir, a Visigothic count holding extensive territories near Murcia, who, with his force of some 1,700 men, attempted to delay the invaders in a series of skirmishes while sending reports and pleas for aid back to Roderick. The establishment of this base, and the arrival of further Muslim reinforcements, quickly demonstrated to Roderick that this was no common raid, and he began assembling what forces he could muster at Cordoba, sending a force of cavalry ahead to aid Theodemir in his resistance, and instructing the Count to withdraw northward to join him. Meanwhile, he began his own much slower march south, hindered by poor logistics, the slow arrival of reinforcements from disloyal vassal chieftains, and a lack of discipline among the conscripted serfs. He finally regrouped with the battered remnants of Theodomir's force at Guadelete, their numbers weakened after a series of skirmishes over at least a month that greatly favoured the mobile Berber cavalry making up the bulk of Tariq's forces, which had also been mercilessly raiding the countryside so as to force Roderick into a battle on the field. Guadelete would soon be the site of a historically pivotal but poorly documented battle that has been the basis of countless conflicting tales and legends. The numbers involved are very much in question, with later Christian chronicles claiming as high as 187,000. Though the number given for the Muslim forces in the Mozarabic Chronicle, 7,000 in Tariq's initial landing force, with 5,000 reinforcements, bringing the total to 12,000, is likely at least significantly inflated as well. It is at least plausible considering the readiness of converted Berbers to join Musa's forces across subjugated North Africa. No figures are given for the Visigothic forces under Roderick, save a similarly unlikely 100,000 claimed by later Arab chronicles. The defenders did most likely outnumber the invaders, with over 30,000 in the highest modern estimates, though given the previously mentioned challenges in mobilizing their Hispano-Roman subjects, even a number half this large is likely generous. But they face problems of disloyalty that undermined their small numbers advantage. Some recurring themes found in both Muslim and Christian sources may shed some light on the events of the Bloody July Day. The previously mentioned Mozarabic Chronicle of 754, though a useful source for information on the Visigothic,
one of the primary sources, the Mozarabic Chronicle, elaborates on the history and politics in the Visigothic Spain. In Visigothic Spain, but only mentions the battle with little detail.
Kingdom's history and politics, mentions the Battle of Guadelete only in passing, and elaborates little on the tactics involved. It does, however, make it clear that many of the more powerful Visigothic tribal leaders had only feigned their support when accompanying their king to battle, intending to lead Roderick to his downfall and claim the throne themselves. And while later accounts are of questionable reliability, this general narrative of betrayal surrounding the kingdom's fall.
Yeah, now that spurred memories that I'm not sure about the Ostrogoths, but the Visigoths were never truly unified until I think the time of Theodoric the Goth, until his death in the Battle of the Catalonian Fields while allying with the Romans against Attila the Hun.
Remains a constant. Some accuse Roderick of having had Witiza assassinated in a coup attempt, while many other accounts are quite hostile towards Witiza and his line as a result of the late king's anti-clerical policies, with villainization of Witiza growing harsher and more common as time passed. Witiza's opposition to a series of discriminatory decrees by the Spanish Church councils targeting Iberia's large Jewish population might have contributed to this, given the growing hostility towards Europe's Jews in the era of the Crusades and Reconquista, a period that had seen renewed interest in the fallen Visigothic kingdom, and to which many of these later chronicles trace. Many of these chronicles even suggest that two sons of Witiza, seeking to claim their father's throne.
The source believed that the two sons of Witiza cooperated with the Muslims to claim the throne. Another claims that it was the Iberian Jews who invented the Muslims to end their harsh treatment under the Gothic rule. It's only at this time where I believe that the Jews were, still unfairly persecuted, because most Christians still blame the Jews for the death of Jesus Christ, which makes little sense since Jesus was born a Jew, as far as I'm aware. So that makes very little sense. But anyway, that's just my view on it. I'm sorry if you know a better one. And I'm probably going to hear about it in the comments, but anyway.
throne had invited the Arabs into Iberia, or that Iberia's Jews had used their close
I just realised I said invented, I meant to say invited.
ties to the Jews of North Africa to do the same, seeking an opportunity to end their long suffering under the harsh anti-Semitic policies of the Visigothic kingdom and its church, which since 694 had even allowed for any Jew refusing baptism to be enslaved.
Wow.
Neither story seems likely, especially considering Wittiser was unlikely to have been older than 23 himself when he died, making any children he might have had rather young for such scheming. But whatever the case, if anyone had hoped to take advantage of the Muslim incursion to claim the Visigothic throne, they would be very disappointed. Roderick had his loyal Visigothic warriors, armoured and bearing axes and swords, split into two contingents, the larger making up the centre of the vanguard, and a smaller detachment held in reserve. Behind these staunch defenders, the ill-equipped levies he had raised from his domain around Toledo and during the mustering at Cordoba were arrayed, in a particularly sorry state even for peasant conscripts. Roderick's hurry to engage the invaders, leaving little time to see these slaves and serfs equipped or drilled. On the wings were the forces of allied chieftains, many of questionable loyalty, and the kingdom's comparatively meagre cavalry remaining after the losses inflicted during Theodomir's fighting retreat. Tarik, though outnumbered, had far more cavalry than his foe, and fewer concerns of morale and loyalty. Though the majority of the Arab warriors that had come forth from Syria to conquer North Africa had either returned home or remained behind with Musa, he had a strong contingent of heavily equipped Arab cavalry making up his army's centre, with Berber and Arab infantry behind them, while Berber light cavalry on the wings and in the rearguard made up the bulk of his army. Accounts vary greatly, but it would seem that the first 2 days of fighting remained more or less in the balance, with both armies suffering mounting casualties and with greater Visigothic numbers seemingly giving them the edge at first. Both leaders encouraged their forces with speeches, Tarik chastising his forces for falling back during the second day's fighting, claiming that only by holding fast and seizing victory could they hope to survive and return home, and promising to lead them to riches and glory on the following day. When the third day's fighting began, Tarik would prove true to his word, personally leading his heavier cavalry in a charge that broke through the Visigothic warriors making up Roderick's centre. With the enemy vanguard depleted by 2 days' fighting, Tarik's cavalry soon found themselves with nothing but scattering serf levies between them and the enemy leaders and rearguard, with the Muslim infantry taking advantage of the breach and following closely behind. The circumstances of the following rout are unclear. A Visigothic leader slain early in the charge seems to have been mistaken by the Muslims for Roderick, starting a false rumour of the king's death that hastened panic and desertion in an army already held together by very little. Some accounts claim that much of the Visigothic cavalry under Bishop Oppa, a possibly illegitimate son of Wittiser's father and predecessor Egica, defected to Tarik as part of a prearranged betrayal, and while this claim is rather doubtful, it is clear that many did desert the king as the tables began to turn. A general rout soon followed, as the levies broke and the Berber cavalry charged the enemy flanks, running down fleeing soldiers. Though Roderick's personal forces put up a staunch defence despite their broken lines, inflicting sizable casualties, the premature rumour of the king's death would soon prove to have come only a few hours too early, and by the fierce battle's end, the king and a sizable portion of the Visigothic nobility had been slain. Nearly 3,000, close to a quarter of the Muslim force had been among the casualties. Losses had been far greater for the defeated Visigoths, and their kingdom would not long outlive their fallen king. With the Visigothic kingdom so reliant on the military dominance of its ruling minority, and commanding little loyalty from its subjects, this single crushing defeat effectively spelled its end. Tarik was quick to march to Toledo in the aftermath, where Oppa, who does not in fact seem to have been present at Guadelete despite later claims of his battlefield betrayal, had taken the Visigothic throne. Oppa would prove a ready collaborator with the conquerors, aiding them in capturing and executing many of the remaining Visigothic chiefs and nobility as they made to flee the capital. 712 would see Musa cross the strait with another army to join his victorious underling in pacifying the remainder of Iberia, with Tarik's army splitting into 4 in order to more swiftly overcome what little scattered resistance remained. Some cities would put up spirited defences, with Seville requiring a 3-month siege and Merida 5 for Musa's army to capture, and with Seville even rising shortly in late 713 in a rebellion crushed by Musa's son Abdelaziz. However, the Visigoths' unpopularity in the urban centres, such as Cordoba, left many ready to accept their new conquerors, and even the Mazarabic Chronicle, though quite hostile towards the Arabs, makes note of Cordoba's flourishing after its later establishment as the capital of the new caliphal province of Al-Andalus in 716. Though Oppa and some new other figures from the old ruling class retained a degree of their former status through collaboration, there would be no more Visigothic kings, and their lines quickly fade into obscurity. If Oppa, Angela, or any others had indeed conspired with the Muslims to take the throne, their ploy had failed, with the Visigoths being assimilated into the larger Iberian Christian population and their power broken. In their place, Musa placed Arabs in most positions of power within the newly conquered state, though the Muslims did also rely heavily on Iberia's Jews to help hold and administer their new territory. With the harsh restrictions put in place by the Visigoths lifted, Jewish communities were among the most eager in accepting the change of rulership, and many Jews rose to positions of prominence as advisors and officials under the comparatively even-handed governance of early Al-Andalus. However, this story would end in tragedy even for many of the victors, and Musa and Tarik would not enjoy the fruits of their success for long. By 715, they had completed the initial conquest of the peninsula, overrunning the lands of the Basques and the northern territories held by Angela, who disappeared from the record, making his supposed collaboration with the Arabs unlikely. But just as Musa had himself taken power in North Africa after the political disgrace of its conqueror, Hassan ibn al-Numan, Tarik and Musa, by this point feuding with each other over the spoils and glory of the conquest, a precursor for more Arab-Berber hostility to come, would be summoned to Damascus by a sickly and aging al-Walid, only to find the Caliph already on his deathbed upon their arrival, and his brother Suleiman the acting monarch. Mired in a rocky succession, with al-Walid having backed his son Abdelaziz ibn al-Walid for the throne, Suleiman ordered Musa to delay his triumphant entrance into Damascus until after al-Walid expired and he properly became Caliph. In doing this, Suleiman hoped to claim some of the glory of the conquest to inaugurate his new reign. Musa refused, however, entering and dedicating his victory and the spoils to al-Walid. This did little to ingratiate him with Suleiman, with predictable results after al-Walid's death less than a week later. Tarik and Musa were both first stripped of their wealth, then disgraced and publicly paraded as traitors, ostensibly in response to Musa's complaints towards the confiscation, but in all likelihood an inevitable part of the broader crackdown on al-Walid's governors and loyalists that took place upon Suleiman's inauguration. The two conquerors of Al-Andalus would live the rest of their lives in obscurity, while Musa's sons, Abdelaziz and Abdullah, left behind as governors of Al-Andalus and Ifriqiya respectively, would both be killed on the Caliph's orders.
Oh wow.
Suleiman's mishandled efforts to assert his control over the far-flung provinces of the empire would backfire in Al-Andalus, however, with the death of Abdelaziz sparking a period of self-destructive infighting, spurred largely by the resentment among the Berbers towards their lesser treatment compared to their Arab co-religionists, despite playing such a vital role in Iberia's conquest. With the conquerors turned against each other, their hold on Iberia would begin to show cracks almost as swiftly as they had won it, with the mountainous northern territories breaking away under the Visigothic noble Pelagius to form the Kingdom of Asturias in 722. It was not the far-flung western frontier of Iberia that Suleiman would spend his short reign focused on, however. Eager to forge his own legacy to match his brothers in the short time remaining to him, he would soon turn the armies of the Caliphate towards a prize long denied them: Constantinople. In our next episode on early Islamic history, we will cover the Caliphate's strike into the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive videos. Join the ranks of patrons and YouTube members via the link in the description, or by pressing the button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, join our private Discord, and much more. Please.
Okay, and that'll do it. This has been another interesting video by Kings and Generals, so there's not much more I can add to that. So if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.